So, how did we come to think about sex the way we do today? It might seem like a pretty simple question, right? But the idea of sexuality as this core part of your identity, well, it has a surprisingly short and honestly kind of strange history. In this explainer, we're going to trace that exact story.
Think about it. For most of us today, our sexual preference, being gay, straight, bisexual, isn't just about what we do. It's a fundamental piece of who we are. It's a lens we use to understand ourselves and even the world around us.
But what if I told you that this entire way of thinking, this whole concept of a sexual identity, is actually a really recent invention? What if, for most of human history, people thought about sex in a completely, radically different way?
To really get this, we've got to jump in our time machine. Let's start way back in classical Athens and Rome, because there, the rules of sex were, to our modern eyes, very strange indeed.
Okay, so here's the absolute key difference. For the Greeks and Romans, it wasn't really about the gender of your partner. That was almost beside the point. What mattered, what everyone cared about, was your role in the act. Were you the active one, the penetrator? Or were you the passive one, the one being penetrated? This had nothing to do with personal identity. It was all a public performance of social power.
And this image, wow, it illustrates the point perfectly. The erect phallus, just like this winged one from Pompeii, wasn't just some dirty symbol. It was a symbol of male power, of domination. They used it to ward off evil spirits. It was literally everywhere. You see, sex, politics, and your social status were all tangled up in what historians call an ethos of penetration and domination.
So, this meant that if you were a free-born male citizen, the one thing you did not want was to be penetrated. It was a huge social taboo. Why? Because it meant you were taking on the submissive, inferior role of someone without power. People like women, boys, foreigners, or slaves. They were considered the proper targets for a dominant Roman man.
But then everything changed. With the rise of Christianity, this whole social framework for sex just gets completely flipped on its head. It's replaced by a deeply moral and, well, frankly, a much gloomier point of view.
This quote from St. Augustine really gets to the heart of it. He was a huge influence, pushing the doctrine of original sin. The idea that humanity's fall from grace, it was all caused by carnal desire, by lust. All of a sudden, sex wasn't a social act anymore. It was a spiritual problem. It was the very source of our corruption.
And this led to a total reversal of pretty much everything. Virginity and celibacy, that became the new spiritual gold standard. Sex was now only okay inside of a marriage. And even then, it had one and only one legitimate purpose: making babies. The desire itself, what Augustine called concupiscence, was now seen as inherently sinful.
Now, this intense focus on procreation had some pretty bizarre consequences. Since making babies was the only good reason for sex, a man's impotence could actually be grounds to end a marriage. So, how'd they prove it? Get this. Church courts would sometimes hire honest women to publicly, well, test a man's ability to perform. And yes, this medieval illustration is showing exactly that.
Okay, let's fast forward again, this time to the 19th century. In this era, the old religious idea of sin starts getting a scientific makeover. The new buzzword is deviance, and the Victorians became obsessed with one act in particular: masturbation.
Yep. What was once just a minor sin was now blown up into a full-on medical crisis. A ton of literature popped up claiming that self-abuse could lead to this terrifying list of problems: madness, blindness, total exhaustion, impotence. It was basically a moral panic dressed up in a lab coat.
And the cures? They were just as extreme as the panic. Just look at these things. You had penis rings with spikes facing inwards. You had machines designed to deliver electric shocks. A whole industry just appeared out of nowhere, creating these contraptions that look almost comical now, but were, deeply disturbing.
This illustration from 1845 really captures the terror they were trying to create. It supposedly shows a man in the last stage of mental and bodily exhaustion from what they called self-pollution. And remember, this wasn't just a spooky drawing. This was presented as medical fact.
Now, this new science of sex, or sexology, didn't stop with masturbation. It started classifying all kinds of sexual behaviors, and in the process, it triggered the most profound change of all: the birth of sexual identity.
The word homosexual first popped up in 1869, and its invention was a massive turning point. It wasn't just a new label for an old act. For the very first time, it described a specific type of person. It suggested that your sexual behavior was tied to your fundamental, innate character.
The historian Michel Foucault summed it up perfectly with this quote. You see, before, a sodomite was someone who committed a sinful act, but anyone could do that. The homosexual, on the other hand, was now a distinct category of human, a biological species defined entirely by their inner desire.
And if this species was a biological anomaly, well, then it wasn't a sin that needed forgiveness, but a medical condition that needed to be cured. And this thinking is what led to homosexuality being officially classified as a mental illness, with treatments ranging from therapy to, you guessed it, electric shocks.
What is just staggering is how recently this all changed. It was only in 1973 that the American Psychiatric Association declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. 1973. The World Health Organization didn't follow until 1992. These ideas that seem so permanent are, in the grand scheme of things, brand new.
So, that brings us right back to today. This whole journey, from act to sin to identity, it really shows that our understanding of sexuality is always being built and rebuilt. It's not fixed. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? If all these powerful ideas about sex were invented, what new ideas are we inventing right now? And what will they look like 100 years from now?